Military decline, retreat, and humiliation. Around 1600, Christian Europe began an unprecedented historical expansion. European imperialism extended in all directions, as the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the discovery of the Americas was turned into military and economic advantage. The military decline of Islam began in 1683, when the Second Islamic advance on Vienna met with massive defeat. Next, the Russians took possession of Azov in 1696, their first Black Sea port. 3 years later, the Ottoman Empire was defeated in Hungary by the Austrian Empire, and the Russian annexation of the Islamic land of Crimea in 1783 was another massive blow. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte commanded a French army that occupied Egypt, easily repelling Muslim forces. Though brief, Napoleon's appearance in Dar al-Islam had a huge impact. It was the first armed advance into the heart of Muslim territory by the West since the Crusades, and it set off a political, religious, and intellectual reaction that continues to this day. Economic decline. By the 18th century, Europeans were in the throes of a major industrial revolution, allowing them to overtake the world economically. The Industrial Revolution was spurred by technological advancements in mass production, steam engines, mechanized weaving machines, skilled labor, and the advent of capitalism and global exploration. For centuries, Muslim economies prospered from the production of agricultural goods and quality art, sold along Islam's extensive trade routes. Now European industry was manufacturing an endless amount of machine-fabricated products, cheaper than Muslim artisans could produce by hand. As competitive European products appeared in markets and shops throughout the world, Muslim businesses began failing, and the high standard of living once enjoyed by Muslims declined. Military defeat, the sick man of Europe. By 1877, Tsar Nicholas IV of Russia believed his forces were stronger than the Muslims. He publicly chided the Ottoman Empire as a dying man and a corpse, and he insisted the corpse should be divided up amongst major European powers. Next, Russia claimed Muslims were persecuting Christian Slavs in Bulgaria and invaded. At war's end, the Islamic Empire ceded Romania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Cyprus, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. Within a few years, France invaded Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, while Egypt was conquered by Britain. Also, Italy invaded Libya, while Persia was divided by Russia and Britain into spheres of influence. By 1905, the Christian West had achieved military, political, and economic dominance over Muslim lands, and millions of believers were now under their control. Islam's conservative response. In the Islamic view, temporary cessation of jihad against the infidel is not cataclysmic. However, suffering defeat and losing territory with Muslims falling under infidel political control was an unknown, painful experience, difficult for Muslims to accept or understand, even to this day. Now Muslims were under the rule of powerful Christian armies, and Muslims throughout the Ummah were shocked. How could Christianity have overcome Islam? How could non-believers with an inferior religion control the true believers who had submitted to Islam? Islamic religious leaders and thinkers concluded that Islam had lost its way over the years from the straight path revealed by Muhammad. Only with return to authentic Islam would the Ummah recover God's approval and support. The Prophet Muhammad had reacted similarly to losses to the Meccans at the Battle of Uhud, and thus helped to reinforce the idea that Muslims should respond to setbacks and challenges by looking inward to their ideology and roots for solutions. The cultural impact of the West. However, the Ottoman Sultan considered the defeats as only a military deficiency. If European military was superior, then learning European military techniques and purchasing their weapons technology would enable Muslims to one day expel the Christians and return Islam to glory. However, the import of European weapons necessitated the arrival of European ideas and institutions to support them, all of which shook the essence of the Ummah as much as the military defeat. Europeans brought economic and technical progress to Dar al-Islam, building an infrastructure of highways, railroads, bridges, and ports, followed by the introduction of automobiles and electricity. The West also established new means of communication, newspapers, radio, and television, all of which disseminated Western culture and ideas. With newspapers came journalists, strange new characters in the Muslim world who challenged authority. The plan for modernization also required the introduction of Western administrative techniques and medical and educational systems into Dar al-Islam. Islamic reaction to government reform. Peace with the satanic Dar al-Harb, extensive cooperation, and cultural exchanges with Christendom, as well as adoption of Western methods of government, had far-reaching theological implications for Muslim thinkers. Europe was considered Dar al-Harb, the historic and perpetual enemy of Dar al-Islam. A permanent state of war with Dar al-Harb and the impurity and inferiority of the Harbi were fundamental beliefs of the Ummah. While reformers advocated secularism and nationalism as the path to revival, the Muslim religious class advocated exactly the opposite, that only a return to traditional Islamic doctrine would return the Ummah to glory, rather than incorporation of new ideas. Thus, Muslim leaders considered the reform movement as nothing less than a declaration of war for the eradication of Islam. The emancipation of the Dhimmi and European imposed reforms. As Europeans and Americans arrived in the Middle East for military service or industrial endeavors, they revisited the roots of their faith in ancient Greece, the Holy Land, and the historic churches of Christianity. They were shocked at the disintegration of ancient Christian holy sites and seeing Christians living in poverty in what they considered a biased justice system. The Westerners demanded integration of tributaries into the Ummah as equal citizens to Muslims, because of the need for complete manpower support and modernization, and from a desire to spread the concept of equality of all religions, considered a great accomplishment of 19th century Christian Europe. The Ottoman Sultan was forced to sign reforms granting equal rights to minority religious groups. Islamic reaction to Dhimmi emancipation. There was a tremendous difference between the Islamic concept of tolerance and protection of minorities and the European concept of equality. In fact, the inherent inequality between Muslims and Dhimmi was an important structural aspect of daily life, relationships, and politics of Dar al-Islam, a society based on religious unity under Islam, with God as the sovereign. Despite this, Europe abolished a fundamental principle of Islamic society. Its relationship with conquered non-believers developed over thousands of years since the Dhimmi of Khaybar, and replaced it with Western values of secular nationalism and religious equality. Muslims, therefore, interpreted Western religious equality as subversive heresy forced upon them by Christendom in order to weaken Islam. Muslims also feared emancipation would sow the seeds of tributary nationalist uprisings, as groups might try to claim back their independence and perhaps seek revenge on Muslims. Dhimmi rebellions. In fact, rebellions by Christian Dhimmi in the Balkans, Greece, and Anatolia resulted in 3 million Muslims being expelled from Christian domination, with over 250,000 killed in Bulgaria. Next, emboldened Armenian Christian groups demanded equal rights and independence from the Ummah. At the onset of World War I, Armenians fought with the Russian army and collaborated with the British Navy. Historically for the Ummah, treasonous behavior by a Dhimmi group under the protection of the Ummah was grounds for expulsion, or, as was the case of the Jews of Qurayza, extermination. On June 13, 1915, the Ottoman government issued a decree. The Armenian societies now have dared join themselves to the enemies now at war with our state. All Armenians are obliged to leave within 5 days under the escort of the gendarmerie. The Christians were told they were being sent to new quarters for resettlement, and so began the death marches the Turks called caravans. A special organization of mobile killing squads decimated the caravans along the way, as well as ordinary Kurds. Railway cattle wagons were used to herd Christian men to the Syrian desert and placed in camps to suffer starvation and final pillage and death by local nomads. On September 15, 1915, the Turkish Interior Minister, Talat Pasha, cabled an instruction to his prefect in Aleppo. You have already been informed that the government has decided to destroy completely all the indicated persons living in Turkey. Their existence must be terminated, however tragic the measures taken may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex, or any scruples of conscience. The estimated final death toll, 1.5 million. The seeds of the Jewish Holocaust. Having allied itself with Germany at the outset of World War I, German military officers and diplomats were present throughout Turkey. They did not participate in tributary massacres, but observed and reported, and would later bring their experiences to the Nazi regime. Franz von Papen served as Chief of General Staff of the 4th Turkish Army in Syria and Palestine. Later, he helped the Nazis seize power and served as Hitler's Vice Chancellor and President of Prussia. Lieutenant General Hans von Seet served as the Chief of Staff at Ottoman General Headquarters during 1917 and was instrumental in the re-emergence of the Wehrmacht in the 1930s and the formation of the SS units. Rudolf Hess joined the German army in Turkey in 1916. In 1940, he was appointed Commandant of Auschwitz, and he became Deputy Inspector of all Nazi concentration camps at SS headquarters in 1944. Dr. Max Erwin von Schubner-Richter was German Vice Consul in Erzurum in 1915 and witnessed massacres of Armenians in Bitlis province. He submitted to Berlin 15 reports on the deportations and mass killings. Schubner-Richter was introduced to Hitler by Alfred Rosenberg, the leading theorist of Nazi ideology, and became one of Hitler's closest advisors. Hitler stated to his commanding generals at Obersalzberg on August 22, 1939, "Who, after all, speaks today of the annihilation of the Armenians?" Also serving in the Ottoman army in World War I was a young officer from Jerusalem, Amin al-Husseini. The end of the empire. After World War I, the newly formed League of Nations assigned Great Britain, Palestine, Transjordan, and Iraq, and the French received Syria and Lebanon. Next, a strong military leader, Mustafa Kemal, who later became known as Ataturk, took power in Turkey. To save Turkey, he decided Islam must be separated completely from government and law. Turkish law was rewritten from Quranic law to incorporate the basic tenets of the legal systems found in Western Europe, and the Roman alphabet was substituted for Arabic script. Kemal declared civil rights for both men and women and established a democratic constitution that called for elections of a president and parliament. Legal and constitutional reform came with the establishment of Western law and courts of law. With new legal reforms, the lawyer came into existence, another strange character who wanted a hand in politics to challenge authority. Friday was no longer an official day of prayers. Polygamy was abolished. Women were not required to wear veils, and Muslim clothes were banned in public. Kemal ended the 1,300-year-old caliphate, sending Sultan Muhammad VI into exile. In 1923, Kemal declared an official end to the Islamic Empire.
Türk milleti tab'en demokrattır.
My friends, those who conquer by the sword are doomed to be overcome by those who conquer with the plow. That is what happened to the Ottoman Empire. The arm that wields the sword grows weary, but the arm that holds the plow grows dangerous.